Is Final Fantasy XIV better than World of Warcraft? Over the last 15 years, I've bought every single WoW expansion on release, and I've subbed on and off throughout the entire period, playing the game a ton when the game is at its best, and then dipping in and out where there's content droughts or dry expansions. So I've easily spent £1,000 on WoW over the years, and I don't regret it. For at least the first 10 years, I loved the game. So when I tell you I quit for Final Fantasy XIV, it's not because I hate WoW, it's because I hate how WoW is being developed and managed as a product and a service. I love the world of Warcraft, but I don't like the game. What's up everyone? I hope you're all doing well today. I want to talk about a pretty controversial but pretty relevant topic. Is Final Fantasy XIV better than World of Warcraft? Or at least, why are WoW players leaving WoW to play Final Fantasy XIV? I came over to Final Fantasy XIV about a month ago, and I've witnessed the WoW refugee effect, the Asmongold effect as well, from the other side. We're seeing thousands of new players in the game right now. The Final Fantasy XIV Twitch category is full of recognizable, partnered WoW streamers. And that's all a great thing. As a WoW refugee, I welcome you all. But is the grass greener over here? So I want to break down this video where Final Fantasy XIV is better than World of Warcraft, what it does better, what makes it a better game, and then where it falls behind and doesn't quite compete. I'm no expert, so I can't speak on endgame progression content, but as someone who's put over 250 hours into the game in the last month alone, I think I'm experienced enough to talk about the systems in the game. I'm going to go through these in order of what's had the most impact on me, and for reference, I've now unsubbed from World of Warcraft. I've got no interest in 9.1. I can't see myself going back to WoW, at least for the rest of Shadowlands. And with how it's being managed by Activision Blizzard, unless there's some big changes, ever again. The first thing I want to talk about is the one that's had the most impact on me and is huge in my opinion, and that's classes and how they're handled in both games. In World of Warcraft, I have around 10 characters at either level 50 or 60 on Horde, and some more on Alliance.
Just be honest, you have an alt problem, don't you?
And that's because I love playing and being different classes. The aesthetic and the playstyle is just so fun. The thought of spending like your entire time playing one class when there's so many other different ways to play, I've always wanted to make more. So one of the biggest pulls for WoW Classic was that feeling of class fantasy. You get class quests. Legion gave you class halls. Right now, there isn't even tier sets in the game. There's nothing that sets a mage apart from a priest or a warlock. In Final Fantasy XIV, the class quests are incredible. I started out as a Lancer, learning how to use the Lance and fighting rival Lancer guilds, fighting rival Lancers, and progressing to 30, you take on the Dragoon job, learning about the inner dragon and using these insane jumps and dragon powers, and you go across this amazing world, learning different things and meeting new people. There's a giant mythical monster looming, there's a quest for a full set of Dragoon armor, and I'm only level 50, but I feel like a level 50 Dragoon, and I've loved the quest line. And that's one of many, many classes. I've also leveled a Gladiator where you train and fight enemy clans in the Gladiators Guild. You eventually train to be a Paladin, and you feel like that class throughout. In WoW, if you make a warrior, you're not a warrior. You're a melee plate DPS with no class fantasy right now. And that's purely because Blizzard took it all out. Blizzard took out the class quest. Blizzard took out a lot of big parts of the game. They completely scrapped the class halls after Legion. There really is nothing in WoW right now setting you apart from the other people in your gear set. So we spoke about the classes, but how are alts handled in the two games? And I'm going to be honest, people will say the job system is a million times better. So just for reference, in World of Warcraft, your character is locked to a class. You make a mage, you can only wear cloth, you can only equip a staff, and you can only learn mage abilities through the whole game. Nothing else can change. You want to be a warrior, you've got to make a new character, new name, new race, new character. You've got to make a new person. In Final Fantasy XIV, everything is open. Your character is not fixated down any one path. You are your character. You want to train with a bow and arrow and be an archer for a few months? Do it. You then want to go and learn how to be a warrior. You put down your bow and pick up a sword, and that's it. And it's refreshing. But I'm going to say, the World of Warcraft style of locking you to a character, I actually do like as well. I think it's quite good to have that fixated class. After seeing it in Final Fantasy XIV, it's a breath of fresh air because you see how badly World of Warcraft have handled the alt system. For many, many years now, World of Warcraft players have had the same complaint, that when you play a new character, let's say you want to make a healer and you make a druid and you level up, let's say you've got 500 hours on a warrior and you level a druid, you've got to do the whole story again. you've got to do everything again unless you pay for a skip. You get to end game, you've got to farm those dailies again. You've got to farm those reputations again. You've got to do those faction intros. You've got to grind through Renowned and Covenant rubbish. You've got to do everything again, even though you've seen it all before, you've done it all before, and it's not interesting. It's a time-gated grind, and you've got to do it again. If you've got 6 months on a warrior and you go make a druid, you're 6 months behind, and you've got to get through that grind again. There's very little catch-up mechanics. Players have waited for like 8 months for 9.1. And with it, they've released like a little story skip for the end game, which probably saves you about 5% of the total time you're going to spend bringing that character up to speed. They could make this so much easier on the player. Like, this is probably boring if you've not played World of Warcraft, but there's so many, you're drowning in systems, and the systems are all time gated. They could skip all of that on ults. Let's say you level let's stick with the druid principle. You level your druid to 60. Oh, you've done the story. You can skip that. Oh, you've done Torghast intro already. Let's skip that. Now you're open to your Torghast dailies. Oh, you're level 40 renowned on your main. We'll give you 30 renowned on your ult. There's so many ways they could make this nicer and more helpful on the player. But there isn't enough content in World of Warcraft right now, so they have to time gate everything and put more roadblocks in to make you waste your time. And it sucks. So everything I've said so far puts Final Fantasy XIV leaps and bounds ahead of World of Warcraft and makes Final Fantasy XIV better than World of Warcraft. There's one area where this might not be the case, and that's specs. So I have a hard time with specs in Final Fantasy XIV. In World of Warcraft, let's say you're a paladin. You can be a tank, a healer, or a DPS. If you love the thought and feeling of a paladin, and you want to be a paladin, you can do whatever you want. You can tank. If you feel like a leader and you feel like the main guy in the group, you can be the tank. If you want to be a supportive back character, you can be a healer. Or if you want the easiest role, you can be the DPS. In Final Fantasy, if you want to be a paladin, you're a tank. If you're a shy guy or you're not confident enough to lead a dungeon or a raid, and you want to be a paladin, you can't. You have to be the tank. But what makes this so much easier is you can change your class with a click of a button. You want to be a tank, go tank some dungeons, click a button, you're a DPS. So is it a problem? I don't know. Is it hard to get over? Absolutely. The next thing I want to talk about, if you've played World of Warcraft, this is going to be a real bugbear. This is going to be something you know and something that probably bothers you and is whispered around all the time. Old content and how it's dealt with. WoW has a way of making old content completely irrelevant. If you join World of Warcraft right now in Shadowlands, and I start talking about old content, you've probably never seen it. You've probably never even heard of it, because the game will purposefully not put you near that content. Argent Tournament, farming in Mists of Pandaria, class halls, garrisons, islands, warfronts, Mage Tower, Suramar, Visions, just some that I remember and that I like. Some of this content was top tier, and it's been either scrapped completely, or is just no longer updated. Why not keep the Mage Tower content? Why not find a way to improve islands and keep them fresh? Why not work harder to integrate the garrison into a personal house or a guild house? Why not add more content to the class halls throughout the next expansions? Right now in WoW, they've got Torghast, and it's in a bad place. They'll improve Torghast all throughout Shadowlands, and then kill it as soon as it's doing well. And nobody can understand why they're doing it. None of the players like that they do this. Even crafting and gathering, there's zero reason to do mining all throughout the game. You get to Shadowlands and you just pick up Shadowlands mining. I've never understood their approach to old content. It shells the game, it makes there less content to do, and the only people that seem to understand it are Blizzard. Final Fantasy XIV, I've got a series going on now where we're like 17 parts in. I've played over 250 hours and I still haven't gone to the first expansion. And that's because I'm doing so much side content. I spent at least 15 hours of fishing from level 1, traveling around the world, doing ocean fishing. I spent a ton of time in the Golden Saucer playing mini games. Every 2 hours there's a card tournament in the Golden Saucer, and every 20 minutes there's a fun event where you can earn a currency to spend on like these fun cosmetics, mounts, things like that. There's Chocobo Racing, Verminion. There's an entire game within the Golden Saucer, and it's full of people all the time. It's relevant. They're awesome rewards. You can go around the entire world battling for cards, like something like Gwent or Hearthstone if you need something to relate it to. There's housing, which is relevant and everywhere in the world. There's housing items to keep housing and guild housing relevant. Crafting is all interlinked and tied into loads of different systems, and you can be every single craft in the game. Some people choose to be omni-crafters, which mean they get every single crafting skill to 80, and they can just blend all the crafts together and produce items for other things, cosmetics, and they're genuinely great systems. Crafting and gathering are their own jobs, specific classes you can switch and play to. I've been trying to understand why WoW kills old content, either by removing it or not updating it, and I honestly can't get inside their head. After playing Final Fantasy XIV, it's even more confusing to me. It either has to be laziness, incompetence, or a lack of care from what players really want. I think this is one change from Blizzard that would grow the game and bring in so many more players and bring back a lot of these refugees that left. Imagine if you're in Shadowlands and there's a quest and it unlocks a new statue for your garrison, or you can build a Covenant hub in your garrison. Imagine if your class order hall gives you new quests throughout Shadowlands that bring you back to the order hall, and they tie the order halls into the story somehow. Some small changes like this would keep things relevant. And after seeing how well it works in Final Fantasy XIV, I just can't understand why they don't do it. And then onto the actual content in the game. And this is going to be the big divider for a lot of people. So when we say, is Final Fantasy XIV better than World of Warcraft? It really comes down to the content you enjoy. If you enjoy PvP, I'm just going to get this straight out of the way. The PvP does not hit like it does in WoW. The systems aren't as strong. The culture isn't there. And it just doesn't feel the same. I think if you are big on PvP, if you're a multi-glad, World of Warcraft does it damn well. It's got its issues, but World of Warcraft does it well. And I think that's the place to be. And then everything else, let's go through. Dungeons. Dungeons in World of Warcraft are really good. I love the dungeons. They're memorable, iconic, and I'm a huge fan of the dungeons. I spent many times progressing Mythic Plus, doing the leveling dungeons. So I can't knock them, they are great. If we look at Final Fantasy XIV, the dungeons are also really good. The one thing that I think they do better in Final Fantasy XIV is the story. So the way they do the story is there'll be a story build-up, or there'll be either MSQ or side quest building up to the story. Then you'll do the dungeon, and then you'll do the story afterwards. Sometimes you even go back and do more story in a hard mode of the dungeon, which is a different dungeon in the same place with a different boss. So that's a really cool touch. The other thing they do better is keeping the leveling dungeons relevant. You do Sestasha at level, 15. You're going to go back there at 30 in a leveling roulette. You'll probably go back there at 45 in a leveling roulette. And there's still rewards and good incentive to be there. And it's the same when you hit 50 and you go past that, you can do the Praetorium again to help other people and get a good reward for it. So there's a way of keeping the content fresh all the way through. Outside of dungeons, you have raids, the same as World of Warcraft. I think they do this just as good. I mean, I've done some minimum eye level, some synced, so I've seen a good challenge. Obviously, I've not seen anything like mythic quality, so I can't comment on that. But hard dungeons exist, mechanics are hard, and teamwork is required. So, and from what I've heard, the end game is really hard. You progress dungeons for months, you progress raids for months. So hard, challenging raid style content is there. So I'd say they're fairly comparable. There's one thing Final Fantasy has that World of Warcraft doesn't, and that's trials. Trials are hands down some of the best instance content I've ever seen. I don't know why World of Warcraft don't do this, and I don't know why they haven't stolen this from Final Fantasy yet, because it's incredible. It's so good. You go in, you queue in, you turn up, and you fight a really big, cool, hard boss with increasing difficulty, normal, hard, extreme, and I think there's a savage, like super hard version as well. And you just walk in, you fight the boss, and you leave. There's no trash. There's no crap. You don't have to wait 4 hours you don't have to cut out 4 hours of your evening to progress through a really long raid. You can just click, turn up, have a go, leave. And there's no punishment for losing. You've just wasted that run. So I don't know why this doesn't exist. I feel like they've done something similar in WoW. There's been a few like very small, like 1 boss, 2 boss instance dungeons, raids, but they really should look at taking this because it is incredible. And it's something that I think I called out quite early, that it's one of the best things about the game. Is Final Fantasy XIV better than WoW in that regard? In PvE and story, yes. In PvP, no. And then I need to move on away from all the different content to something huge, and that's the community. Obviously, as a streamer and content creator, my experience has been different, and I have had kind of preferential treatment. So I want to talk about, I'm not going to talk about all the gil and items people have tried to trade me, because that's not comparable to the average player. I want to talk about the normal average player playing both games. Thinking about instance experience when no one knows who I am. The first dungeon I did in Final Fantasy XIV, Sestasha. My first experience here was incredible, but it also continued throughout the rest of the dungeons in the game. I spent ages looking at the loot and trying to compare it. People waited for me. I was awful at my rotation. I went in tanking with no tank stance on, And people were understanding. People sent me a tell, hey man, I think your tank stance isn't on. I'm still learning now, but people are super understanding. There's no DPS meter, no one's telling me off. I leveled a tank to 30 and no one's ever rushed ahead and pulled half the dungeon or been annoyed when I went the wrong way. To incentivize this, there are commendations. So if you're rude, you won't get one. If you're toxic, people will report you. Being rude in general is flat out not a thing in this game. There are the odd people that may be rude. I've played for over 250 hours. I've got a lot of people that come to my streams and watch my YouTube videos. I've got nobody on my blacklist. And then outside of instance content, there's so much for the community to do, which I think builds that community within the game. How long have people been asking for housing in WoW or guild housing? I played Final Fantasy XIV for like over 200 and something hours, and a third of that is just doing random community stuff. Sitting in the guild house chatting, messing around, sitting in Limsa, listening to bards and chatting to people, having fun with friends in the Golden Saucer. This is a massively multiplayer online RPG. That is what this is. I go back, I spend time doing certain content. I go back to Limsa, I see people on my friends list. I see people I've seen before. I even see strangers and I go up and talk to them. This is there's a community. There's a massive openness to the community. And because there's not so much like sharding and instancing, you see people you know all the time. This is an MMORPG that is alive, not an instanced online game. If I had to compare this to World of Warcraft, I would say World of Warcraft Classic was an MMORPG. World of Warcraft Shadowlands feels more like Destiny 2 or some other heavily instanced game where you go back to a community hub at the end of the day, or like a social hub where the rest of the game is just instant, click in and out of content. WoW doesn't have an open world anymore. It's an open instance. In Final Fantasy XIV, every single time I'm in Limsa, if I sit there for an hour, I can promise you I will see an orange name running around, a friend waving at me, a stranger running around and trading people stuff. I saw a guy the other day who was dressed as a cook and he was running around giving cookies to people. There really is a community in this game, and I haven't seen that in WoW since probably Wrath of the Lich King. People blame it on the group finder in Wrath, but we've got a duty finder in Final Fantasy XIV, and we've still got a great community here. And because of that, that bleeds into the other content. Outside of your guild, there's so much toxicity in World of Warcraft. There's so many systems that are designed to allow toxicity. One of the big things you do in World of Warcraft Endgame is Mythic Plus dungeons. 90% of the time, unless you queue up with a friend, you're in there with a stranger because of how the group finder works. You're just going in with a stranger from some other server normally. You're incentivized to go fast. You're incentivized not to fail. And if you leave, you're punished. So there's a massive toxicity if anything goes wrong, and there's a massive elitism for stuff to go right. You need to go fast, you need to kill fast, you need to do everything right. And if you mess up, you're going to ruin my key. And then you come out of your mythic dungeon, and where do you go? You go to an instance city where you're a stranger again. So I don't know how they can fix it. I think I've already said a few suggestions, but they need to fix the underlying systems to allow the community to grow. I don't blame the WoW community for being the way they are. I don't blame people in Mythic Plus progressive dungeons for being toxic, because you're in a toxic environment. I don't blame you for not having a community and a bunch of friends, because there's no reason to go and talk to people in World of Warcraft anymore. So is the community better in Final Fantasy XIV? 100%. Does that make it a better game? 100%. But it's not the people that's wrong. And all these WoW refugees coming over, they're not toxic people. They've come from a toxic game. And then if we're saying, is Final Fantasy XIV better than World of Warcraft? We've talked about the content and the players, but there's one thing that drives all of that, and that's the developers. I've left it till last, but it's probably the most important. In World of Warcraft, there's a constant battle with the developers. It feels like the World of Warcraft is a war between the players and development. The developers sit in an ivory tower, plan their content, plan their things, and completely ignore and isolate the players. They either ignore requests or they put them out months later and expect a big thank you for them. Not only that, but the changes and content they work on come from board meetings and analytics and shareholders rather than player feedback and request. In BFA, Blizzard removed the most iconic thing in the game, tier sets. They were the main reason people raided, and they made your character feel unique. You complete a raid as a warlock, you start unlocking a warlock tier set, and you feel like a badass. After nearly 3 years after removing this, they're considering adding it back. And they want people to be praising them. It baffles me. People complained about PvP vendors being removed. Their reason for removing them was because people can't find them. But it was so they could timegate the content. After years of people begging for them to come back, they put them back in. And that's the attitude of the developers. There's constantly a back and forward and a fight, not only for new content, but to get our content back. And it's a constant battle, and it just makes no sense. And I think Shadowlands was just the final straw for a lot of people. People saw a lot of problems in BFA, raised issues, raised complaints. They were ignored, and we had to sit and put up with those systems. In Shadowlands, people raised complaints and issues in the testing and said, we don't like this, you should do it this way. And everyone was pretty much in unison. They just did it how they wanted anyway. And those problems all came to be. And they've just sat there and let these bad systems fester for 9 months. So players are leaving. I can't talk about the history of Final Fantasy XIV because I'm a new player. But I've watched interviews, I've seen stuff from the fan shows, I've seen the people from the Final Fantasy XIV teams dressed up as characters, I've seen them come on stage crying, I've seen them do funny and silly stuff and engage with their community in fun ways. I've seen developers running around and getting emotional on stage. So although I can't speak for the Final Fantasy history, from everything I've seen and the people I've talked to, Yoshi P and the development team are worshipped and admired and praised in every avenue of the game. In World of Warcraft, the developers are seen as the enemy.
And by the way, you don't want to do that either. You think you do, but you don't. Remember?
So to summarize, I'm still going to leave this as an open question. Is Final Fantasy XIV better than World of Warcraft? If you've watched this video, I think you already know my answer. I'm loving the game. I'm so happy I moved over and I can't see myself going back. I find it hard to talk bad about a game that I love so much. I will draw some flaws and some reasons that people might not enjoy the game. First up, the anime style. If you're not into this style, you're not going to like this game. I struggled with it at first, but it slowly grew on me. If you give this a try through the free trial and you still don't like it, then this won't be for you. If you can never accept your character and you can never accept the style, you're not going to like the game. If you're not a fan of heavy stories, if you've never played like a big RPG like the Final Fantasy games, the single player ones, like The Witcher 3, or big heavy story games, you're not going to like this. If you just want to bash through content, you're not going to like this. You're going to be one of the people who comes in trying to buy a level skip, a story skip, and you're just going to miss a really key part of this game. So if you don't like story games, you're not going to like this. Next up, PvP. I think World of Warcraft handles PvP so much better. I've only played a little bit of PvP in Final Fantasy, but from what I've seen and from what I've heard, it just isn't as good. And it's acknowledged that it's not the strongest part of the game. If you're big on PvP, if you're an arena gladiator in WoW, I think stick there. I think that's going to give you more of what you want. But for the average person who's looking for a home, who's looking for a community, and who's looking for a fun game, is this a better MMORPG? In my opinion, it absolutely is. But that's why I left the title open, because everyone is different. I'd love to know what you think in the comments. Is there something about this game that's putting you off? Have you recently come over and you really like it or you dislike it? Or are you still on the fence about trying it? I'd love to know what you think, and I don't want to pressure anyone in any other direction. These are just my thoughts and opinion, who's someone who's played them both. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Drop a like if it's helped you. Drop a dislike if you've really not enjoyed it. That's fine. Other than that, take care everyone, and I'll catch you in the next one.